Sea levels rose steadily, swallowing continents one by one. The once thriving human civilization was submerged and humanity fell into decline. However, in the underwater world, marine life began to flourish. Water filled every space, sweeping away everything in its path. It did not care what it destroyed: the Statue of Liberty or high-rise buildings, suspension bridges or highways. All automobiles were reduced to a shapeless mass of metal and rubber. But amidst the wreckage and devastation, new life emerged, teeming with sea creatures, many of which were extremely dangerous. A thick layer of silt rose from the ocean floor as a man in a massive diving suit slowly walked through the ruins of the flooded city. Walking beside him was a boy named Boda. Both deep-sea explorers held harpoon guns in their hands. The man quickly scanned the area and warned his son that there might be broken glass ahead. Yeah, I already saw it, Dad," Boda replied. They stopped in front of what had once been a convenience store. The father lifted a leaning beam and pushed it aside to clear the entrance. Inside there was nothing unusual. Trash sold, empty shopping baskets and carts, spoiled goods floating aimlessly, and fish gliding serenely between the aisles. Suddenly Boda's gaze landed on one of the shelves. Stepping closer, he beckoned to his father. "I think there are some canned goods left here." By that time the man had already found a cart which now held the supplies they had gathered. "Take anything that might be useful," he instructed. Boda picked up a large tin can, turning it over in his hands. "What's inside?" he asked. His father frowned. "I take it you never learned to read?" The boy immediately began to defend himself. "What's the point? We barely have any books left anyway." His father was taken aback by his son's carelessness. "Even if reading seems useless now, it might come in handy one day. You need to study harder." "Stop grumbling," Boda muttered unhappily. As the boy examined a pair of broken glasses, his father found several iron forks. "We should head back," Boda said. "We already have enough forks at the base." The man simply chuckled. His son didn't understand that even something seemingly unnecessary could prove invaluable in the right situation. Trying on the broken glasses over his diving suit, Boda rolled his eyes. After securing their supplies, his father took one last look at their haul. Today's scavenging trip had been a success. Gripping the cart tightly, he instructed his son to hold on before pulling a special cord. A mechanism engaged, releasing 5 massive balloons that lifted the explorers and their loot toward the surface. As they ascended, Boda glanced back at the ruins below. His father called these places the ruins. It was clear that this city had once been full of people. A chill ran down the boy's spine. The submerged buildings looked eerie and desolate. The people who had lived here had either perished or managed to escape in small groups. Yet despite all their travels, they had not encountered a single survivor. At last the balloons broke through the water's surface and the explorers emerged near the small vessel that served as their home. On the mast stood a girl named Lita, gazing at the horizon as if searching for something. Despite her focus, she immediately noticed her father and brother's return. "Daddy, you're back," she called loudly. The man looked up, removed his diving helmet and asked Lita, "Did you see anything on the horizon?" The girl pressed herself against the sun-warmed mast and shook her head sadly. "No. Just endless water." Her father sighed heavily, then walked across the deck and sat down on a nearby crate, placing his helmet beside him. "We haven't seen a single bird in months," he said thoughtfully. Then hesitating, Lita asked, "Dad, do you really think we're the only survivors?" Her voice wavered as she continued, Did everyone go to heaven? Like Mom?" The children looked at their father expectantly. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, then stood and pulled them both into a tight embrace. "I'm sure there are other survivors out there, somewhere far away. The ocean is just too vast for us to find them right away," he reassured them. But until they found someone else, he had sworn to protect his children at all costs. "Promise me one thing," he said, gently ruffling his daughter's hair and placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Promise me that you will always look out for each other." The children exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. Their father let out a relieved sigh. In this world they had to remember that they were a family. Only by supporting one another could they survive. He was responsible for hunting and maintaining the ship, while his children had their own duties to fulfill on board. Boda was in charge of food and water, while Lita took care of the rest of the household chores, laundry, cleaning and other tasks. Father was responsible for scouting the ruins. He periodically descended into the depths, digging through the rubble in search of anything useful. Since last year, the man had allowed Boda to hunt on the surface, of course only after the boy had learned all the necessary skills. More recently, his father had begun taking him along to explore the ruins. It was a crucial skill if humans wanted to survive for as long as possible. Anything that could be salvaged from the flooded areas was pulled to the surface with a dredge, a crane-like mechanism capable of grabbing small loads and easily lifting them onto the deck. The surviving family hauled up everything they could find in the sea: old machinery, canned goods and various other discarded items. One of Lita and Boda's favorite pastimes was examining the strange machinery that had been lifted from the water. There was one absolute rule on this ship that all ocean survivors had to follow without exception. And now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a deep purple, it was time to remember that rule. The alarm clocks tied together suddenly began ringing frantically, their sharp chimes echoing across the waters. The hands on their dials pointed to 9:30 p.m., a time their father had always feared. As soon as the alarm clocks went silent, he gathered the children and they all hid together in the hold. No, this wasn't just any time, it was a time the entire family dreaded. The father remained outside until the last moment, waiting for his son. But Boda suddenly remembered the fish he had recently caught and hung up to dry. He wanted to run back for it, but his father grabbed him and held him tightly against his chest. "I don't care about the fish," he said sternly. The most important thing is to hide before dark. Without wasting time, his father unceremoniously pushed Boda into the hold and hurried inside himself, carefully securing the hatch behind him. 5 minutes passed. The sun had completely vanished beyond the horizon and another starry night settled over the world. The hold was silent, broken only by the steady ticking of a clock. A bundle of alarm clocks was fastened to the base of the mast. Not far from Lita stood a jar with a small fish floating lazily inside. The girl reached for the jar and asked her father, "Can I hug the fish?" Her father and brother turned to her at the same time, pressing their fingers to their lips in a warning gesture. Their reaction frightened the girl even more. She quickly hugged the jar, clutching it to her chest. Suddenly the ship lurched violently. A deafening rumble echoed from all sides. Father whispered softly, "They are here." They were the sea monsters, predators of the night. They had risen from the depths hunting for prey. The terrified family had no idea that their last refuge had already been surrounded by at least 6 of the creatures. The portside plating had already been torn off and Boda clamped his hand over his mouth to keep a horrified scream from escaping. He was terrified. The boy mentally pleaded with the monsters attacking the ship to just go away. Suddenly Boda felt a strong hand on his shoulder. It was his father. His father turned him around and promised that everything would be alright. Despite the danger, his face radiated a surprising calmness. "The monsters are just pushing the boat out of curiosity. They'll leave soon," he said quietly. But the rumbling and the debris falling from the ceiling suggested otherwise. The man pulled out a blanket from somewhere and covered Boda and his sister with it. Boda hadn't fallen asleep yet, so he asked his father, "Where you used to live, were there a lot of monsters too?" His father smiled and nodded. "There too. Those things live in the water, don't they?" "But there were harpooners in the cities," he whispered, his voice filled with excitement and pride. "Harpooners?" Boda asked in surprise. His father had never spoken of them before. "That's what they called the people who fought sea monsters to protect their cities," the man explained. The boy imagined the scene and stared at his father with wide eyes. Meanwhile, his father pointed to the tattoo on his left shoulder. "It's a harpooner's mark," he said. Boda crawled closer to get a better look. The tattoo was a circle with branching arrows inside it, surrounded by smooth lines resembling the tentacles of sea creatures. Below the tattoo were 6 small faded dots. "They're not dots," his father chuckled softly. "They're stars." Boda tilted his head in confusion. He had never seen stars before. Then his father suddenly realized why. Boda had never left the boat at night and had never had the chance to see the stars. The man raised his head, gazing at the ceiling as if he could see the night sky beyond it. He began to explain. "Stars are like bright lights, so bright that you can see them even in the darkest night. Long ago people used them to guide their way so they wouldn't get lost. Sailors navigated the seas using the stars. They look like millions of precious gems scattered across the black canvas of the sky." After describing this beauty, the father looked down at his children. Boda and Lita were already sleeping peacefully. He wanted so badly to show them the stars, but not tonight. As soon as morning came, the children rushed out of the hold and ran onto the deck. Boda gasped in shock. All the fish they had stored, enough to last a week, had disappeared into the jaws of the hungry monsters. The deck was in complete chaos. Their father hugged them and said, "We were very lucky to come out of this unharmed." Lita nodded happily. She hadn't been hurt at all. Boda, however, stared at a single point deep in thought. "Are you sure we're lucky?" he muttered, pointing to the side of the boat. One entire edge of the hull was missing. The wooden planks were covered in deep cracks as if a giant beast had clawed at them. The marks seemed to warn them, "Leave this place or suffer the same fate as the dried fish." His father clapped him on the shoulder. "It's nothing. It just means I have a week's worth of work ahead of me." Boda sighed. "Yeah, a job that might use up all the spare parts we have left." Realizing there would be no better opportunity, he turned to his father and declared, "Dad, I'm old enough to go down into the ruins alone." His father immediately tensed. He grabbed Boda by the shoulders and shook him slightly as if trying to shake the idea out of him. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "You must never go into the ruins alone. Monsters often hide in the wreckage of old buildings and ruins. It's dangerous even during the day." Boda gave him a pleading look. "But I want to help. We went there yesterday and nothing happened." His father rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Yes. At first glance that place may seem safe." He fell silent for a moment, deep in thought. It seems I have no choice. It is forbidden to go down to the ruins until you are 17. There was no end to the son's indignation. The boy lashed out at his father with grievances. Why does he decide where children should go and where they shouldn't? He thought he was old enough to go wherever and whenever he wanted. However, the father explained that such a precaution was necessary for the safety of the family. But the boy seemed to ignore his father's reasonable arguments. Then Dad pointed to the vast expanse of water. Father had only forbidden them from going down to the ruins on their own, but the entire ocean was completely at their disposal. They could go anywhere together. At those words, Boda scoffed. No, they'd be stuck on this boat for a long time anyway, and there was nowhere else to go but the water. There was nowhere for them to go, just like the fish in their confinement. Thinking about it, the boy looked at his father with a challenge. Father and son stood before each other and the atmosphere between them began to grow tense. Man was about to launch into a long explanation, but his fiery speech was interrupted by little Lita. She urged him to stop arguing and look at the horizon. Lita pointed to a small flock of seagulls. Boda and his father immediately forgot about their disagreement. After a while, following the flock of birds, the boat reached a small dilapidated apartment building. The place was now favored by the birds. Boda had never seen anything like it. To him, the building seemed like a simple cottage built on an island. Remarkably, on the supposed roof of the house was a ship somewhat like their own. The boy felt encouraged, perhaps there were other survivors here. The children began shouting towards the building calling for people, but their father quickly managed to cover their mouths. The man drew his weapon, adjusted his grip, and ordered his son and daughter to stay in place and remain quiet. Finally, he asked his son for one favor. If he didn't return, Boda would need to turn the ship around and sail as far away from this place as possible. The boy nervously asked, "Is Dad really going to fight with the survivors?" Dad sheathed his weapon behind his back. "Whether I fight or not depends on the integrity of the inhabitants." With that, he jumped into the water and swam toward the building. Underwater, there were large apartment buildings collapsed like a house of cards. The children silently watched their father's receding figure. Soon they saw him effortlessly climb onto a concrete platform and shake off the water. The man looked up. From a distance, the building appeared tiny, but as he got closer, it revealed itself to be a decent height. Dad slowly climbed the stairs and shouted into the emptiness, "Is anyone here? We need help." He began examining every nook and cranny, every ruin outside, but found no one. Then the man decided to go inside and take a look around. Unfortunately or fortunately, there was nothing inside the building except debris, dust, and a staircase made of homemade wooden steps embedded directly into the wall leading upwards. They were clearly built after the catastrophe, meaning people most likely hid on the upper floors. Climbing the railingless stairs, the man reached a green door. Carefully opening it, he found that there was no one there except for a skeleton in partially decayed clothes. He quickly scanned the room and spotted 2 more skeletons lying on the floor, twisted in broken positions. Meanwhile, the children stood on the deck waiting for their father. Both hoped that the people their dad had found would be good ones. It would be great to meet them and get acquainted. Suddenly, Boda heard a strange splash. Turning around, he saw a human figure desperately floundering in the water as if drowning. Boda couldn't believe his eyes. Where could a person have come from here? Meanwhile, their father continued to search the room with the skeletons. In one of the drawers, he found 2 explosives shaped like small torpedoes. He carefully took one of the bombs and examined it. Interesting. I wonder where this antique came from, he thought. With these thoughts, the father slowly turned toward the huge crack in the wall, still puzzled. He began inspecting the damaged wall. What is this hole? Steel rebar is bent inward. Could it have been attacked from the outside? The man cautiously peered outside to inspect the external walls, which were covered with claw marks. He thought for a moment. These marks looked painfully similar to those left by sea monsters on the ship's deck the previous night. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. His body froze as a piercing girl's scream reached his ears, calling for him. He quickly returned to the ship and found the following scene. Boda, armed with ropes and a life ring, was preparing to help the drowning person overboard. The man looked at the unfortunate figure and screamed in horror. It wasn't a person at all, it was a skeleton. The creature disappeared abruptly and the entire area was swallowed in deep silence. Boda hesitantly asked, "What was that?" Only then did the father realize there was something very dangerous beneath their boat, and whatever it was had already hooked their family. Sensing something was wrong, the man scooped up the children and prepared to jump toward the hold. But it was already too late. A gigantic monster with eyes and a huge jaw resembling a human one prepared to leap. The creature let out a long screech and jumped out of the water, landing exactly where the ship was. Its massive teeth sank into the sides of the floating vessel. The father and both children were thrown to the stern. The man stared in horror at the monster's face. Above the human-like jaw was another smaller mouth with sharp needle-like teeth, and its nose resembled a human's as well. Now this enormous creature stared at the humans as if deciding what to do with them.